Arrogant millionaire dares black waitress to dance. She steals the spotlight. Seconds later, what you're about to hear is not a fairy tale. It happened right in the heart of New York, at one of the city's most lavish charity galas, where the price of a single ticket was higher than an entire month's rent for most ordinary people. But in a place where crystal chandeliers gleamed and the fake smiles of the elite masked the chill beneath, truth was always rare. A line was crossed that very night. Inside the prestigious Grand Astoria ballroom. The air in the Grand Astoria that evening was thick with the scent of money and imported Dutch lilies, blended with the classic perfume of Chanel. For the guests, it was just another Tuesday night of the year, but for Cassandra Riley, or Cassie, as the few colleagues who remembered her name called her, it was another grueling 16-hour shift, a trial of both body and spirit. She wove her way through the glittering gowns and tuxedos with a practiced grace that only years in service could teach. Her black and white uniform was pressed to perfection, a thin disguise that allowed her to dissolve into the cold luxury of the room. In her hand, a silver tray balanced glasses of Dom Perignon champagne, every move as precise as if it had been choreographed. No one cared. To them, Cassie was a shadow, there when needed, gone before anyone noticed. Tonight was the annual fundraiser for the St. Jude Children's Foundation, a gathering where New York's wealthiest applauded their own generosity while bidding on trinkets they would never actually use. Cassie had served countless nights like this. She knew the rhythm of polite chatter, the hollow smiles, the perfunctory cheek kisses. She slipped past a middle-aged woman draped in millions worth of diamonds, laughing shrilly at a dull joke from a man with a shining bald head. Neither of them saw Cassie. She was just another cog in the invisible machinery of service, efficient, silent, forgotten. Before the event began, her manager, Genevieve Peterson, a tense but kind middle-aged woman, had given her a quiet reminder. Keep your head high, Riley. These people can smell fear. Be polite, be efficient, and never, ever react. React? Cassie thought bitterly, as if she had the energy left to react after endless shifts like these. Her feet throbbed in the black, slip-resistant shoes she always wore. But the ache in her body was nothing compared to the ache in her heart, still raw from the rejection letter she had opened that morning. The Donovan Academy of Arts Scholarship Committee regrets to inform you that the words still echoed in her mind. 4 years, 4 long years since she had given up her beloved ballet shoes, trading her dream for hospital bills after her father, James Riley, was crippled in a construction accident. His job, his health, her future, all gone in a single day. Since then, her life had been a daily fight for survival, ballet nothing more than a distant ghost. And yet, in fleeting moments between tables, Cassie could still feel the stage lights on her skin, hear the orchestra swell, sense the breathless hush of an audience waiting for her first step. The dream never let go. She was pouring water at table 12 when she suddenly felt a gaze fixed on her. Not the blank stare of the wealthy, but something sharper, curious, cruel. She looked up, managing a polite smile, only to freeze at the sight. Preston Montgomery III. She didn't know his name, but she knew the type. The kind of handsome molded by generations of privilege, slick blonde hair, a Rolex worth more than her car. At his side sat his fiancée, Veronica Davenport, face elegant and icy, along with his friends Blake and Austin, who laughed at every word he said. Preston's eyes cut through her, as if she were nothing more than a cheap ornament. He leaned toward Veronica, raising his voice just enough for Cassie to hear. Look at them, like little wind-up dolls, no soul, no passion. Veronica chuckled softly, a sound colder than ice. Cassie swallowed her anger, keeping her face smooth, pouring water as Mrs. Peterson's warning repeated in her head, "Never react." But she had no idea that in just a few minutes, the line between endurance and dignity would be pushed to its breaking point, and that this very night would alter her life forever. Cassie quietly turned away, her back straight, though Preston Montgomery III's contemptuous gaze still clung to her like sharp needles. She forced herself to act as if nothing had happened, clinging to the composure she had cultivated over years of endurance. Yet, with every step across the plush carpet of the Grand Astoria ballroom, the past rose up within her, vivid and painful, tightening her chest. Her hand gripped the silver tray unconsciously, as if holding on to a memory that had once been so beautiful, the day she received her acceptance letter from the Donovan Academy of Arts, one of the most prestigious schools for dancers in New York. She remembered it perfectly. A bright spring morning when she was 17, her father, James Riley, placed the letter on the breakfast table in their small Queens apartment. His eyes lit with boundless pride as she tore the envelope open and burst into tears of joy. "Cassie, sweetheart," he said, wrapping his strong arms around her. "I always knew you could do it. I always knew you were born to shine on stage." That moment would never fade. The pride in her father's eyes, the certainty that her life was opening into a chapter of realized dreams, a future where she stood on Broadway under dazzling lights, greeted by thunderous applause. Back then, she believed with all her heart that everything good lay ahead, but it all shattered one fateful afternoon. Cassie had been in her final ballet class of the day, her movements flowing to the music of Swan Lake, when a frantic call from her mother brought her world crashing down. "Your father's been in an accident," her mother's trembling voice said. "Cassie, he's in the ER at Queen's Hospital. You need to come now." That day scarred her forever. She raced into the hospital, still wearing her rehearsal leotard, her heart breaking at the sight of the strongest man she had ever known lying motionless beneath the sterile glare of machines. James Riley, who had labored tirelessly as a construction worker to support his family, now lay helpless in a hospital bed. "You'll be okay, Dad," Cassie whispered, choking back sobs. "You'll get better, and you'll see me dance on Broadway, right?" But harsh reality came faster than hope. Within days, doctors informed Cassie and her mother that her father would require long-term treatment, with costs far beyond their means. She watched her mother weep until there were no tears left, and in that moment, Cassie knew her life had changed forever. With no other choice, she set aside her dream. She withdrew from Donovan Academy, taking any job she could find to cover her father's medical bills and keep their household afloat. Day by day, her white ballet dress and beloved point shoes were folded neatly into a drawer, gathering dust alongside the dream locked away with them. One cold, rainy afternoon, the school called. "Cassandra, if you don't return soon, your scholarship will be revoked. We're sorry, but we cannot allow further delays." The voice on the line was flat, merciless, every word like a blade cutting deeper. She had begged for more time, but it was useless. When she hung up, she stared out the window as raindrops slid down the glass, mingling with her tears. From then on, every letter from Donovan Academy bled her heart anew. And this morning, the rejection letter had landed like the final blow, reminding her of everything she had lost. The Donovan Academy of Arts Scholarship Committee regrets to inform you that your application has not been selected. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Cassie squeezed her eyes shut, bitterness burning her throat. Future endeavors? She thought with scorn. Her dream, her future, had been crushed under the brutal weight of survival. When she opened her eyes again, she was startled to find herself back in the Grand Astoria ballroom, tray of champagne still balanced in her hand. A woman in a shimmering, silver sequin gown raised her hand to summon her, her expression indifferent, as if Cassie were invisible. "Your drink, ma'am," Cassie said softly, politely, offering the glass. The woman took it without a word of thanks, turning back to her conversation as if Cassie didn't exist. Cassie stepped back, her gaze falling to her reflection on the polished marble floor. Once again, she felt the bitter sting of invisibility, but Cassie had no idea that within minutes, right here in this glittering ballroom, her life would take a turn she could never have imagined. A turn set into motion by the sheer arrogance of Preston Montgomery III. Cassie was just about to step away from the table when a cold, arrogant voice cut through the air, slicing into her thoughts. "Hey, you, come back here for a moment." She flinched slightly, then slowly turned back to the table she had just served. Before her, Preston Montgomery III was staring with thinly veiled disdain, a smug smirk tugging at his lips as his fingers tapped lightly against the snow-white silk tablecloth. He was the very embodiment of the elite Cassie knew too well. Young, white, polished to perfection in the most artificial way. Golden hair slicked neatly with gel, a tailored black tuxedo that fit like armor, and leather shoes gleaming with a price tag worth 3 months of her wages. "Yes, sir. How may I help you?" Cassie asked, her voice steady, though her palms had begun to sweat under the weight of Preston's icy gaze. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let his eyes roam over her from head to toe, as if appraising a cheap trinket. Cassie could feel the stares of nearby guests turning toward her, burning her cheeks with humiliation. "What's your name?" Preston asked at last, his tone dripping with mockery. "Cassie. Cassandra Riley, sir," she replied, forcing her voice not to tremble. Preston narrowed his eyes, then turned to the woman seated beside him, Veronica Davenport, a wealthy socialite famed for her beauty as sharp and cold as steel. Dressed in a sapphire silk gown that hugged every curve, her long, wavy brown hair cascading perfectly down her shoulders, Veronica's red lips curled in disdain the moment Cassie said her name. "Cassandra Riley," Preston repeated slowly, drawing out each syllable with deliberate scorn. Such a lovely name for such a lowly job. Blake and Austin, his ever-present companions in luxury, burst out laughing, their ridicule blending seamlessly with the atmosphere Preston was carefully cultivating. "Oh, Preston, don't be so hard on her," Veronica said softly, though her cold eyes never left Cassie. There was no sympathy in her voice, no kindness, only the casual cruelty of someone who saw servers as no different from inanimate decor. Preston's smirk widened, his gaze still locked on Cassie. "Well then, Cassandra, care to explain why there's a watermark on my tablecloth?" He pointed at a tiny droplet that had fallen from his own glass, nearly invisible, yet weaponized into a public accusation. Cassie followed his finger, her chest tightening. She knew exactly what he was doing, blowing nothing into something simply because he could. And she also knew that in this glittering, merciless world, even the smallest mistake could cost her the job she desperately needed. "My apologies, sir. I'll clean it right away," Cassie said, her voice calm, polite. She reached for a fresh white napkin from the nearby table, but Preston raised a hand, stopping her, his voice cutting sharper than before, loud enough to silence the room around them. "No, no, Cassandra. I don't think the problem is the water. The problem is your attitude. People like you don't seem to respect the fact that guests here spend tens of thousands just to sit at this table." The words pierced like needles into Cassie's heart, but she held her composure, bearing the storm inside. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll be more careful," she whispered, bowing slightly to conceal the shimmer of tears in her eyes. Veronica smiled with satisfaction. Blake and Austin howled with laughter, their entertainment found in her humiliation. Preston leaned forward, his eyes glacial, his voice low, yet clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Perhaps this job is too complicated for you? Maybe you should stick to where you belong. Fast food counters, or janitorial work, perhaps?" A ripple of laughter spread from the surrounding tables. Cassie felt every eye drilling into her, her shame rising like a choke in her throat. "Perhaps you're right, sir," she said softly, masking the hurt in her tone. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll continue serving." Preston reclined back with a smug ease, swirling his champagne glass, still watching her with mocking eyes. "Go on then, Cassandra. Do try to do better next time, though I won't expect much." Cassie bowed her head and walked away, her heart weighed down by bitter humiliation, each echo of their laughter cutting like a blade against her soul. What Preston Montgomery III could never imagine, however, was that the very arrogance in his words would soon prove to be his greatest mistake. For those insults, dripping with cruelty, were about to awaken a force within Cassie she had never known she possessed, a force that would turn everything upside down. Cassie had just turned away from the table, trying to steady the wild pounding of her heart from the humiliation, when Preston's cold, mocking voice once again sliced across the ballroom. "Wait a moment, Cassandra. I've changed my mind." Her body froze mid-step. Every muscle in her back pulled taut as though she had been struck by a whip. She drew in a sharp breath, forcing herself to stay calm, though her hands clenched the silver tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. Preston tilted his head slightly, flashing a smug smile at Veronica, Blake, and Austin, his eager audience, relishing every second of the spectacle he was orchestrating. "I don't think wiping a little water off the table is quite enough to prove your worth," he drawled. "An exceptional server like you should demonstrate her value in a far clearer way." His words immediately captured the attention of the surrounding guests. Conversations dwindled into silence, eyes turning toward Cassie. The air grew heavy, taut with an unnatural anticipation. Cassie slowly turned back, forcing her expression to remain composed even as dozens of curious stares bore into her. But when she met Preston's icy blue eyes, she understood. He was deliberately staging a cruel performance to shatter the last shred of her pride. "What else would you have me do, sir?" Cassie asked softly, her tone polite yet trembling with emotions she fought to suppress. Preston took a slow sip of champagne, savoring the tension he had conjured, then rose smoothly from his chair. His tailored tuxedo framed his tall, commanding figure like armor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly enough for all to hear, "let me make myself clear. A truly skilled server must offer more than pouring drinks or cleaning tables. She should also know how to please her guests." A ripple of chuckles spread through the room as the heads turned, the crowd eager for entertainment at her expense. "I have a little challenge for Miss Cassandra Riley," Preston continued, his voice sharp with condescension. He pulled a thick stack of cash from his jacket pocket, raising it high so every guest could see. $10,000. Yes, 10 grand if she dares to dance a tango with me, right here, right now. Gasps and murmurs erupted across the ballroom. The audacity of the challenge, so laced with mockery, shocked the guests as much as it thrilled them. Veronica lifted a hand to her lips, suppressing a laugh, her cold gaze cutting into Cassie. Blake and Austin broke into gleeful laughter, clearly savoring the cruelty of the scene. But Preston wasn't finished. He stepped closer until barely a yard separated them, His voice dropped low, yet still loud enough for the onlookers to catch every venomous word. "Of course, there's one small condition. If you make even the tiniest mistake in this dance, I will personally see to it that tonight is your last night working at the Grand Astoria." Cassie felt the world narrow to just her and his chilling stare. Each word struck like a blade to her dignity, slicing deep. The whispers around the room grew louder, anticipation building. Everyone wanted to see how the young black waitress would respond to the powerful, arrogant billionaire's taunt. Cassie swallowed hard, fury and humiliation burning in her throat. Her eyes flicked briefly to the money in his hand, enough to wipe out her father's medical bills, enough to buy her escape from this grinding life. Yet her pride screamed in protest, outraged by the degrading bargain he dangled before her. Her voice faltered, breath caught in her chest. She could feel Veronica's scorn, Blake and Austin's eager amusement, and Preston's sadistic satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. "Well, Cassandra," Preston sneered, "do you accept? Or will you scurry away like a frightened little mouse?" Cassie's gaze locked on his icy eyes daring her very soul. She knew he cared nothing for the $10,000. What he wanted was her humiliation, proof for all to see that she was beneath him. The room was suffocating with tension, every guest waiting on her next word. Cassie drew a long, steadying breath, her heart hammering in her chest. Then, from deep within, a quiet but resolute voice rose above her fear and shame. Lifting her chin, Cassie met Preston's stare, her voice ringing clear and unyielding into the charged silence. "I accept your challenge, Mr. Montgomery." At that moment, Cassie knew she had crossed an invisible line. From here on, her life would never, could never, be the same again. Cassie's voice rang out through the opulent ballroom like a sudden powerful wave tearing through the suffocating tension, leaving the room suspended in breathless silence. It was as if every sound, every whisper had been vacuumed out, leaving only the piercing weight of dozens of curious stares fixed on the small young woman before them. Her heart pounded like war drums before a great battle. Her fingers gripped the silver tray so tightly they trembled and turned pale. Inside, she was a battlefield of colliding forces, fear screaming at her to retreat, pride surging to push her forward. On one side was terror, fear of losing her job, her only income, the lifeline paying for her father's endless medical bills, fear of losing even the faintest shred of dignity she still clung to. Fear barked at her to bow her head, refuse Preston's cruel challenge, and disappear into the shadows where no one would mock her further. But on the other side, buried deep in her chest, burned the fierce pride she thought long extinguished. The spirit of a girl who once danced on stage, who once knew the intoxicating joy of showing her talent to the world. That part of her had never truly died. It had only been buried under years of hardship, grief, and sacrifice. And now, Preston Montgomery III's arrogant, sneering eyes had unearthed it, igniting it into an uncontrollable flame. Cassie lifted her chin, locking eyes with him. His cold blue gaze cut into her like a blade, filled with mocking anticipation. Veronica Davenport stood beside him, her lips curved into a frosty smile, eyes glinting with naked disdain. Blake and Austin practically vibrated with excitement, salivating at the thought of watching Cassie crumble and humiliate herself before New York's elite. That mockery, that contempt, that was the last thing Cassie could accept. That was the line she would never allow to be crossed. Her pride roared louder than her fear. She could not, let Preston Montgomery reduce her to a toy for his amusement. She drew a steadying breath. Slowly, with deliberate calm, she set the silver tray onto a side table. Then she untied the pristine white apron from her waist, folding it carefully, almost ceremoniously before placing it beside the tray. It was as if she were laying down not just her uniform, but the invisibility, the smallness, the silence she had worn for so long. Her eyes sharpened as she bent down to slip off the old, heavy black work shoes from her aching feet. The moment her bare soles touched the soft silk carpet, something surged through her veins, a power she thought had been lost forever. "Cassandra, are you certain you want to do this?" Preston asked. His mouth curled into a taunting smile, though for the briefest instant a flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. He hadn't expected her to truly accept. Cassie didn't answer. She simply lifted her head and looked straight at him, her voice ringing with defiance and pride. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life, Mr. Montgomery." Her words cut through the air like steel. Veronica's smile faltered, her brow creasing with irritation. Blake and Austin, once brimming with mockery, fell into uneasy silence, their laughter fading. All eyes followed Cassie as she walked, steady and composed, into the center of the vast dance floor. Above her, the grand crystal chandeliers glimmered, their golden light cascading down like a spotlight on a star returning to her rightful stage. Preston followed. Arrogance still etched across his features, but Cassie saw it now. A thin crack in his mask. Behind the ice in his eyes, a trace of uncertainty, of unease, flickered. Perhaps even he hadn't believed she would dare to face him here, in front of everyone. Cassie stopped in the center of the floor, her gaze blazing with pride. She knew this choice was more than accepting a cruel dare. It was a declaration, a turning point, her destiny shifting with every breath. In that moment, beneath the dazzling lights, the years melted away. She could feel it again, the familiar rhythm of ballet, the intoxicating pull of the stage, and she heard her father's voice echo in her memory, the words he had spoken the day she entered Donovan Academy. "Cassie, you were born to be on stage. Never let anyone steal your dream." She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, summoning the ghost of applause she once knew. When she opened them again, fire burned in her gaze. She would not fail. She would show Preston and every single person in this room that her dream was still alive, unyielding, unbreakable, and eternal, no matter how life had tried to bury it. Beneath the brilliance of the crystal chandeliers, glittering like 1,000 stars, Cassie stood motionless, waiting for Preston to approach. In that suspended moment, she could feel every heavy breath of the hundreds of guests watching, each of them transfixed by the unexpected tension and drama unfolding before their eyes. Preston Montgomery strode toward her, his handsome face etched with smug self-assurance. Standing opposite Cassie, his cold blue eyes drilled into hers as if to declare absolute dominance, as though he were the one in full control. "Ready, Cassandra?" he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, his tone dripping with mockery. "I hope you understand the consequences of a stumble." Cassie didn't respond. She simply placed her hand lightly on his shoulder, feeling the rigidity of his arrogance in every muscle. He seized her hand and pulled her into the tango stance with careless force, his movements rough, dismissive. Cassie let him lead at first, offering no resistance, appearing to surrender completely. As the first strains of tango music spread through the ballroom, Preston moved with bold, forceful steps, every motion laced with vanity. Cassie deliberately allowed her footing to falter slightly, feigning imbalance, feeding his arrogance. "Careful now, Cassandra," Preston murmured mockingly in her ear, the smirk widening across his lips. You wouldn't want to lose your job tonight, would you?" A ripple of laughter rose from the crowd. Veronica, standing nearby, smiled with icy satisfaction at Cassie's apparent awkwardness, pleased with the thought of her humiliation. Blake and Austin exchanged gleeful looks, confident this cruel spectacle would end swiftly with Preston's victory. But Cassie knew. That was exactly what she wanted him to believe. With each passing step, Preston's self-confidence swelled. His movements grew more ostentatious, more forceful, drunk on his own sense of superiority. He was too blinded by pride to notice the subtle transformation in Cassie's eyes. Her heartbeat steadied. The music coursed through her veins. The violins and piano surged into a passionate crescendo, and in that instant, Cassie shed her false restraint. She let her true strength emerge. The mastery of a dancer trained at Donovan Academy, a ballerina who had once lived for the stage. When Preston tried to spin her into a complicated step meant to trip her, Cassie surged ahead. Barefoot, her movements turned sharp and fluid, her body gliding across the silk carpet as if she were flying. Every step was precise, every motion infused with power and grace. The crowd gasped, holding their breath in disbelief. For a fleeting moment, Preston froze, his smug expression collapsing into shock and confusion. Cassie seized control, and suddenly it was she who led, reversing the roles with flawless command. Preston scrambled to keep up, but his clumsy efforts only made his weakness more obvious against Cassie's brilliance. Veronica's smirk dissolved into a furious scowl, her eyes wide with disbelief as she realized their scheme was unraveling before her. Blake and Austin's laughter choked in their throats, replaced by stunned silence as they watched their arrogant friend stumble helplessly. Cassie spun with elegance, pulling Preston along like a puppet, her movements bold and exacting. In his eyes now she saw panic, a vulnerability he had never revealed before. She pressed on, every second a statement of defiance. Her steps quickened, her technique sharpened. The room was spellbound. Guests who moments before had laughed now stared in awe, their faces alight with astonishment and reverence. Preston faltered more and more, his rhythm breaking, his breath ragged as he struggled to follow. The mockery of minutes ago had dissolved into a silence so thick it trembled, every gaze locked onto the young black waitress who now blazed like a star in the center of the Grand Astoria's opulent dance floor. As the music reached its climax, Cassie executed a breathtaking spin, snapping Preston into the final pose of the tango. She held it, her head lifted high, her eyes fixed on him with fierce defiance. Preston stood gasping, humiliated, his face flushed with shame and fury. Cassie stood radiant under the glittering lights, and the ballroom erupted in thunderous applause, shocked, awed, and resounding with admiration. In that moment, she knew she had not only seized victory in the dance, but also rewritten the course of her destiny. The music slowly faded, the final notes dissolving into the air like the last echoes of a beautiful dream. Cassie stood tall, her back straight, her chin lifted, her breathing steady though her heart thundered in her chest. Across from her, Preston was gasping for breath, his once perfect golden hair now damp with sweat and falling loose across his forehead. The arrogance that had defined his face moments ago was gone, replaced by fury and humiliation blazing in his cold blue eyes. For a moment, the ballroom was silent, utterly silent, as though every guest needed a heartbeat to comprehend what had just unfolded before them. Then a single clap rang out, sharp and resonant. Another followed, and then, like a crashing wave, hundreds of hands came together in thunderous applause. Guests rose from their seats, delivering Cassie the kind of ovation the Grand Astoria had never witnessed in all its glittering history. Cassie turned her head, stunned, her heart swelling. Faces that had once looked at her with scorn or pity were now alight with admiration, even awe. Veronica Davenport stood frozen, her flawless features stiff with disbelief, her eyes seething with bitterness and rage. Blake and Austin exchanged uneasy glances, their smug delight erased, replaced by shock at the undeniable downfall of their most powerful friend. Cassie knew in that moment she had won, not just against Preston Montgomery III, but against years of prejudice, contempt, and quiet injustice she had endured. Yet, before she could let the smallest smile touch her lips, a sharp, dry sound cracked through the air. She looked down. A thick stack of cash lay at her feet, flung carelessly onto the floor. When she raised her eyes, she saw Preston, his face flushed crimson with rage, his hands trembling as they clenched into fists, his entire body taut with barely contained fury. "There's your money," he spat through gritted teeth, his voice shaking with humiliation. "Take it and get out." Once more, the ballroom fell into a tense, uncomfortable silence. The admiration that had filled the room moments ago shifted into shock, even distaste. A few guests frowned, visibly unsettled by Preston's brazen display of cruelty. Cassie's gaze dropped to the bills scattered at her feet. Anger and bitterness surged in her chest. $10,000, the very sum that could pay her father's hospital bills, lift her family from crushing hardship, and buy her relief from the grind of survival. Yet she knew with absolute clarity that bending down to take it would mean something far worse. Surrendering the dignity and self-respect she had just claimed back with every ounce of her soul. She lifted her head, meeting Preston's eyes with a fiery resolve that made her voice ring steady, calm, but commanding enough to fill the hall. "I don't need your money, Mr. Montgomery. That dance wasn't about earning anything from you. I did it to prove, to you and to everyone here, that I am not your toy to be mocked and discarded. My dignity cannot be bought." Cassie's words hung heavy in the air. She glanced one last time at the money on the floor, then turned, her steps firm and deliberate, leaving the crumpled bills behind as a testament to her pride. Applause erupted again, louder, stronger, fiercer than before. The crowd wasn't just applauding her performance now. They were applauding her courage, her dignity, her defiance in the face of arrogance. Cassie walked toward the exit, each step accompanied by the thunder of clapping hands, by admiration that washed over her like a tide. Tears pricked at her eyes, but they weren't born of pain or humiliation. They were tears of something she hadn't felt in years. Vindication, pride, and the sense that she was finally living by the values her father had instilled in her: self-respect, honor, and unyielding dignity. At the grand doorway, she paused, glancing back one final time. Preston stood rigid, his face pale, his eyes burning with shame and hatred he could no longer disguise. Cassie said nothing. She didn't need to. Her actions had already spoken louder than words ever could. The massive doors closed behind her, shutting away the glittering ballroom. But the sound of applause, fierce and unrelenting, echoed in her mind. Cassie walked out of the Grand Astoria that night knowing one truth with absolute certainty. No matter what hardships lay ahead, she would never again lose herself. She had proved, before all who had doubted her, that her pride and her spirit were unbreakable. The moment the grand doors of the Grand Astoria closed behind Cassie, Nathaniel Crowe, a young photographer with a sharp, discerning eye, had already captured every moment of the explosive scene that had just unfolded. Nate had been hired to take glamorous shots of the charity gala, but he never imagined he would end up documenting such a stunning reversal. Scrolling quietly through the images on his digital camera, his gaze lingered with a mix of awe and emotion. Frame after frame appeared before him. Preston's smug arrogance as he challenged Cassie, her calm yet defiant expression as she accepted, the moment she shed her apron and shoes, and finally, the breathtaking performance that left Preston completely undone. But the most striking images were of Preston, his face twisted with bitter defeat, hurling the thick stack of $10,000 bills at Cassie's feet, and the one right after. Cassie, her eyes ablaze with pride, turning her back and walking away, leaving the money scattered on the silk carpet. Nate paused on that photograph for a long time, his heart pounding. He knew instinctively this was the image, the one that captured, in a single frame, the stark contrast between the arrogance of wealth and the unshakable dignity of a young woman who refused to bow. Without hesitation, Nate connected his camera to his laptop and uploaded the photos to social media. He wrote a short but powerful caption, recounting the night's events. Cassandra Riley's courage, self-respect, and dignity, and Preston Montgomery's public disgrace, the heir to the infamous Montgomery real estate empire. Within an hour, the post exploded far beyond anything Nate anticipated. Thousands of shares, comments, and reactions poured in. Hashtags like Justice for Cassie and Montgomery, shame shot to the top of Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The public was outraged at Preston's brazen arrogance and blatant disrespect, while deeply moved by Cassie's courage and refusal to be humiliated. Soon, forums and major news outlets picked up the story. Online headlines blazed across the internet. Heir to Montgomery empire brought down by young waitress in stunning tango showdown. Black waitress rejects $10,000 to defend her dignity against Montgomery arrogance. Nate's photographs spread like wildfire, plastered across every platform, fueling a tidal wave of backlash against both Preston and the Montgomery Corporation. Celebrities began voicing their support for Cassie, praising her bravery and calling on the public not to remain silent in the face of such blatant humiliation. At the same time, a grassroots GoFundMe campaign titled Justice for Cassie appeared online. Its modest goal was $10,000, the exact sum she had refused. Within hours, donations soared well beyond that, climbing into the tens of thousands and continuing to rise by the minute. While the public rallied around Cassie, chaos erupted at Montgomery Corporation headquarters. Executives and PR staff convened an emergency meeting, scrambling to contain what was rapidly spiraling into an unprecedented crisis. Richard Montgomery, the patriarch and chairman, sat at the head of the massive conference table, his face stern and thunderous as he replayed the viral clip Nate had posted. His eyes burned with a mix of fury and humiliation as he watched his son throw money at a young waitress. "We must control this immediately," Richard roared, slamming his fist on the polished wood. His voice carried the weight of power, but it couldn't mask his seething rage. "My son has turned this family into a laughingstock before the entire world." Meanwhile, Preston had locked himself away in his luxury apartment, dodging the endless calls from his father and the company's board. He sat staring at his phone, scrolling through wave after wave of merciless comments and scathing posts. Each word felt like a blade slashing through his pride. Rage boiled inside him, but for the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. He had never imagined that his arrogance, his smug confidence, could lead to such catastrophic consequences. What tormented him most was the unbearable truth. Cassie, the very girl he had dismissed, mocked, and degraded, was now a symbol, a hero, an icon of pride and justice in the eyes of the public. Clutching his phone with white knuckles, Preston knew one thing with chilling certainty. From the moment he provoked and humiliated Cassandra Riley, his life had veered onto a path from which there was no return. He was no longer the one in control. He had awakened a wave of justice and outrage so powerful, even he could not stop it. Inside the cold, sterile boardroom of Montgomery Corporation's headquarters, Richard Montgomery sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the massive screen replaying an endless loop of damning news about his son. His face darkened as the words scandal, discrimination, humiliation flashed across the screen, accompanied by stock charts plunging sharply downward, a brutal reminder of the severity of the crisis. Richard had always been a man of power, composure, and absolute control. But this time, Preston's reckless behavior had pushed beyond anything he could have imagined. His son's thoughtless actions had inflicted not only financial damage but also catastrophic harm to the Montgomery name, a legacy Richard had spent his entire life building and protecting. "Mr. Montgomery, the press won't stop calling," said his senior aide Linda, her voice taut with tension. "They're demanding an official statement immediately." Richard turned, his expression hard, his eyes like steel. "We'll make a statement soon, but first, get Preston in here." "Now." Linda nodded quickly and hurried out. Minutes later, Preston entered the cavernous room, his once proud face now gaunt from sleeplessness, his eyes stripped of their usual arrogance. Gone was the swagger, replaced by uncertainty, helplessness, and a flicker of fear at his father's rare, unrestrained fury. Richard stared at his son in silence for a long moment, his disappointment and anger so sharp that Preston instinctively lowered his gaze. "Do you even realize what you've done, Preston?" Richard's voice was cold, commanding. "In a single night, you've turned this family into a global laughingstock. Our stock price is plummeting faster than in any crisis we've ever faced." Preston swallowed hard, fumbling for words that would not come. I was just trying to have a little fun. I didn't think it would go this far." "Fun?" Richard erupted, surging to his feet, his fist trembling with fury. "You call humiliating someone in front of a crowd fun? You've branded this family as a symbol of arrogance, prejudice, and cruelty. Do you honestly believe I raised you to act like this?" The air thickened with suffocating tension. Preston said nothing, his head bowed in shame. Deep down, he knew, this time he had gone too far. Just then, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He glanced down, his stomach tightening when the name Veronica Davenport lit up on the screen. It wasn't a call, it was a text. Short, sharp, devastating. "Preston, I can't continue our engagement. I won't be tied to your collapsing career and reputation. Don't contact me again." Preston's hands trembled as he stared at the message, his face blanching. Rage and despair twisted together inside him. Richard, reading the panic in his son's eyes, spoke grimly. "Veronica's ended it, hasn't she? Did you really think she, or anyone else, would stay after you've lost everything? Your dignity, your respect, your credibility?" Preston stayed silent. His so-called friends, Blake and Austin, had already stopped answering his calls. One by one, everyone was abandoning him. He had never felt so utterly isolated. Richard exhaled heavily, his tone softening but still unyielding. "There's no other option now, Preston. You must hold a press conference immediately and issue a public apology. We have to salvage what little we can before this spiral destroys us completely." Preston looked up at his father, defiance flickering in his eyes. But Richard's stern voice cut off any thought of resistance. Don't look at me like that. These are the consequences of your own actions. If you don't want to end up a disgraced failure, rejected by the entire world, then do the right thing. If not for yourself, then at least for this family." Reluctantly, Preston nodded. He knew his father was right. The press conference would be his final chance to cling to what remained of his reputation. But deep down, he also knew nothing he said could erase the stain of what he had done. The meeting ended. Preston slipped out of the boardroom, his footsteps echoing through the long, empty corridor. It felt less like leaving a meeting than walking away from a sentencing. He wasn't just condemned by the public, he was condemned by his own father. Back inside, Richard sat alone, the weight of it all crushing him. Never had he felt such fury and such helplessness at his son. All he could do now was try to contain the damage, to preserve what was left of the Montgomery name, the empire he had built with his life's work. Outside the room, Preston stood still, staring blankly down the hallway. He knew his life would never be the same again. One mistake, one moment of arrogance, had destroyed everything he once held. His status, his wealth, his fiancée, even the trust of his own family. Now, for the first time in his life, he would have to face the consequences, utterly, devastatingly alone. While Preston stood frozen in despair in the dark corridors of Montgomery Corporation, across the glittering city of New York, Cassandra Riley was facing an opportunity she had never dared to dream of. The soft glow of late afternoon streamed through the window of a small, modest but cozy cafe in the heart of Manhattan. Seated across from Cassie was Gregory Bishop, the legendary Broadway director, renowned for discovering and nurturing the most extraordinary talents. He was a refined man, his silver hair neatly combed, his deep, perceptive eyes seeming to see straight into the soul of whoever sat before him. "Cassandra, I can't stop thinking about your performance at the gala the other night," Gregory said, his voice warm and sincere, his gaze filled with admiration. "You have a rare gift, the ability to command an entire room's attention. You were clearly trained at a very high level, weren't you?" Cassie nodded, her face touched with both shyness and gratitude at such praise from a living legend. "Yes, I studied at Donovan Academy of Arts, but I had to give it up because of family circumstances." Gregory leaned forward, his expression soft with compassion, his tone encouraging. "If you don't mind, would you share what happened? I truly want to understand." Cassie hesitated for a moment, painful memories flooding back, the kind she had spent years trying to bury. But when she looked into Gregory's eyes, brimming with empathy and sincerity, she felt safe enough to tell her story. "My father, James Riley, ran a small construction business in Queens. It wasn't a big company, but he was proud of it. He built it from nothing and always hoped one day it would provide security for our family." Her voice softened, her eyes clouding as she relived the day that had shattered their lives. "About 5 years ago, he signed the biggest contract of his career with a massive real estate conglomerate. He thought it was our chance to escape hardship, but halfway through, the conglomerate suddenly canceled the contract, citing legal loopholes my father couldn't fight. His company went bankrupt almost overnight. It broke him. His health declined quickly after that." Gregory's brow furrowed, his face darkening with sorrow and anger. "This real estate conglomerate, was it?" Cassie gave a bitter nod, her voice tight. "Yes, it was Montgomery Corporation. More specifically, one of Richard Montgomery's subsidiaries, Preston's father." Gregory fell silent, stunned, as if trying to process the weight of what he had just heard. He had heard rumors of the Montgomerys' ruthlessness, but he had never realized their greed had destroyed the life of a gifted young woman sitting right before him. Incredible. he muttered, his voice trembling with outrage. You sacrificed your artistic future because of their cruelty. Cassie looked down at her hands, quiet for a moment, then lifted her head. Her eyes burned with strength and resolve. I've lost so much because of them. But the one thing I never let go of was my dignity and my pride. I know my father would never want me to give up on my dream. Gregory gazed at her intently, admiration written across his face. He saw not only rare talent, but a fighter, a young woman with the courage to rise again after every fall. Cassandra, I want you to know how deeply I respect your courage and your pride. I'm working on a new musical about resilience, courage, and hope rising above injustice. And from the moment I saw you on that dance floor, I knew you were the one destined to play the lead. Cassie froze, her eyes wide with disbelief and emotion. Her heart pounded at the words she never thought she would hear. Mr. Bishop, is that true? I don't even know what to say. Gregory smiled warmly and laid a gentle hand over her trembling one. You don't need to say anything, Cassandra. Just tell me this. Are you ready to stand up again and fight for the dream that's always been yours? Cassie looked straight into his eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt an unshakable certainty burning inside her. A smile spread across her face as she nodded with fierce confidence. Yes, I'm ready, Mr. Bishop. I won't let anyone take my dream away from me ever again. Gregory's smile deepened, his grip firm and reassuring. Then, prepare yourself, Cassandra. The world is about to see you in a way they never imagined, and I promise you, this time, nothing and no one will stop you from shining. After her emotional meeting with Gregory Bishop, Cassie returned home with a heart both uplifted and heavy. She knew the painful truth about the Montgomery Corporation she had just revealed to the legendary director could not remain hidden forever. But if she truly wanted to fight for justice and reclaim fairness for her father, she had to be ready to face public scrutiny, to finally speak the whole truth, something she had never dared to do before. She sat quietly in her small apartment, the soft golden light of a desk lamp casting shadows over her pensive face. At last, she picked up her phone and dialed the one person she trusted to help bring the truth into the light, Nathaniel Crow. Nate answered immediately, his voice filled with warmth and passion. Cassie, I'm so glad you called. Do you know how much your story has inspired people already? Cassie exhaled slowly, her voice gentle but firm with resolve. Thank you, Nate, for sharing what happened that night. But today, I'm calling for something bigger. I want to tell the whole story, not just about the gala, but the real reason I had to give up my dream. Nate paused, sensing the gravity in her tone. His voice dropped, careful and serious. Cassie, are you sure? Once you go public with this, there's no turning back. Cassie gave a faint, bittersweet smile, her eyes shining with determination. I know, but I can't let the Montgomery family keep crushing innocent people. I want the world to know how they destroyed my family, and how they treat people like us. The next morning, Nate met Cassie at their familiar little cafe to record what would become the most important interview of his career. Sitting across from him, Cassie spoke with clarity and strength, recounting every painful detail her family had endured. She described her father, James Riley's small construction company, once full of potential, until it was crushed by Montgomery Corporation's fraudulent contract terms. She detailed how the conglomerate abruptly canceled the deal, bankrupting her father overnight and plunging him into a health crisis. Her voice trembled when she spoke of the day he was rushed to the hospital, the bleak months that followed, and how she was forced to abandon Donovan Academy to help her family survive. I'm not telling this for pity, Cassie declared, her eyes blazing with pride and conviction. I'm telling it. Because people need to know what really happens behind the glitter and wealth of corporations like Montgomery. This isn't just my story, it's the story of countless families victimized by greed and indifference. Just hours after their conversation, Nate's feature article appeared on the front pages of major outlets under the headline, "The Painful Secret Behind the Stunning Tango. Young Waitress Exposes Montgomery Corporation's Cruelty." The piece spread like wildfire, igniting unprecedented outrage. Social media exploded with millions of shares, comments, and trending hashtags like Monday Justice for Cassie and Montgomery Corruption. The public was furious over Montgomery's deception and abuse of power, demanding justice not just for Cassie, but for every family destroyed by their ruthless practices. Under immense pressure, local authorities launched a formal investigation into Montgomery's illegal contracts and unethical business conduct. Overnight, the once untouchable empire that dominated New York real estate became the center of a historic scandal. Inside Montgomery headquarters, Richard Montgomery sat grimly with his lawyers, watching stock prices plummet and fielding relentless calls from regulators. Rage and despair consumed him. For the first time, he realized he could not smother the truth with power and money. Cassie's testimony had struck a chord with the conscience of society itself, unleashing a storm too powerful to contain. Across the city, Cassie sat quietly by her window, gazing at the evening light spilling over New York's crowded streets. Her heart felt lighter now that the truth was out, though she knew the fight was only beginning. Yet, for the first time in years of hardship, she felt firmly grounded, brave enough to confront those who had shattered her family. She understood the road ahead would be grueling, but it would also be filled with hope, because this time she wasn't alone. She carried the strength of truth, the force of justice, and the unshakable support of millions who now stood with her against the greed and cruelty of Montgomery Corporation. While Cassie felt the strength of justice and the overwhelming support of the public, across the city, Preston Montgomery was preparing for the press conference he had never wanted to face. At a luxury hotel in the heart of Manhattan, Montgomery Corp's media team scrambled to arrange everything, desperate to salvage the company's image amid the deepening crisis. Preston stood before the mirror in a private dressing room, staring at his own reflection. He felt as though he had aged years in just a few days. His once piercing blue eyes were now hollow, devoid of the arrogance and confidence that used to define him. Mechanically, he adjusted his tie, his father Richard Montgomery's furious words echoing in his head. "This time, if you can't show genuine remorse, you'll drag the entire company down with you." Forcing himself forward, Preston stepped into the press hall packed with reporters. The flashes of countless cameras exploded the moment he took the podium, each blinding light stabbing at what little pride he still had left. Drawing a deep breath, he picked up the statement his lawyers and PR consultants had prepared. His voice was flat, robotic, utterly devoid of sincerity. "I, Preston Montgomery, wish to extend my deepest apologies to Ms. Welsh, Cassandra Riley, and her family. My careless and unintended actions have caused unnecessary harm." But his rehearsed words were quickly drowned out by sharp questions hurled from the reporters. "Mr. Montgomery, is this a genuine apology, or just damage control for your company's image? Preston, why did you throw money at a young black woman in an act of blatant humiliation? Do you feel any shame for what your family did to the Rileys and to others?" Preston faltered. His cold, detached demeanor only enraged the crowd further. He pressed on with the scripted apology, ignoring the questions, but his empty delivery stoked even more fury. Within hours, media outlets condemned the sham apology. Headlines blazed. Preston Montgomery's fake apology, Every word sparks more outrage. Montgomery family drowns in scandal. Public rejects hollow words from an arrogant heir. The fallout spread rapidly. Investigations piled up, lawsuits emerged, and Montgomery Corp's past contracts were dissected, revealing years of exploitation, fraud, and manipulation. Business partners began withdrawing. Stock prices crashed uncontrollably. The situation grew so dire that the board of directors called an emergency meeting. One by one, faces Richard Montgomery had known for decades turned against him. Coldly, they demanded his resignation to salvage what little remained. Richard sat silently, his gaze sweeping the room. Each expression he met was filled with anger and disappointment. At last, his voice broke the tension, bitter but steady. "I understand. I will resign, but let me be clear. This is not just my failure. It is the failure of an entire system that allowed arrogance and indifference to fester for far too long." With Richard's resignation, Montgomery Corp plunged into the darkest chapter of its history. Lawsuits flooded in, and federal authorities expanded their probe into every project the company had touched over decades. As for Preston, he collapsed into despair. Veronica publicly denounced him, branding him cruel and immoral. His closest friends abandoned him, unwilling to be tainted by his disgrace. He became the very symbol of corruption, arrogance, and decay among the elite. A man once perched atop power, now cast down by the very public he had once scorned. He hid from the world's gaze, locking himself inside his luxurious but suffocating apartment. Alone in the shadows, shame and hopelessness consumed him. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of public scorn. The eyes that once admired him now filled only with contempt. In the endless quiet that followed, Preston thought of Cassie, the woman he had mocked and humiliated. She now stood tall, strong, and unbroken, while he had lost everything. He realized every consequence he now faced was born of his own arrogance and cruelty, but the knowledge came too late. Nothing could undo what had been done. With his head bowed in darkness, Preston was left with only the crushing truth. The Montgomery dynasty, once a symbol of wealth and power, was crumbling into ruins, all because of his selfishness. And now, he would have to live forever with regrets no amount of money or power could ever erase. While the Montgomery family sank deeper into crisis and despair, elsewhere, Cassandra Riley was preparing to step onto the greatest stage of her life. Standing in the wings, the dazzling Broadway lights shone before her like 1,000 stars, and Cassie felt her heartbeat pound in rhythm with the stirring overture. She closed her eyes for a brief moment as memories surged back, shards of her painful past. The day she gave up her dream for her family's tragedy, the years of silent endurance, scorn, and discrimination. But now all that pain had been forged into strength, a steel, hard resilience and dignity no one could ever take away. Thunderous applause filled the theater as the curtain rose. Cassie stepped onto the stage with grace and confidence she had once believed lost forever. Bathed in light, she knew, more clearly than ever, that she had found herself again, reborn in the passion she thought was gone. The new musical, Phoenix Rising, written and directed by the legendary Gregory Bishop, had been inspired by Cassie's own story. For 2 hours, she captivated the audience with her acting and exquisite ballet technique. But what set her apart was the raw emotion that poured through every step, every note, every breath. The audience was entranced by the powerful story of a young woman scorned by society, crushed by the wealthy and powerful, yet who rose unbowed to defend her dignity. When the final note fell, the theater erupted in a standing ovation. Hundreds rose to their feet, tears in their eyes, faces shining with admiration for the small, strong woman glowing under the stage lights. Cassie stood there, gazing at the crowd, her heart overflowing. This was not just triumph, it was redemption. On Broadway, before thousands of adoring eyes, she understood she was no longer Cassandra Riley, the invisible waitress. She was a symbol of justice, a living voice reminding the world that human dignity is the most precious value of all. Critics quickly hailed her performance. Headlines poured in. From ashes to spotlight, the triumphant rebirth of Cassandra Riley. Ballet dancer once crushed by Montgomery Empire becomes icon of justice and dignity. In their small apartment, her father James Riley watched the performance on television, tears streaming as pride filled his eyes. At last, his little girl had emerged from the shadows, shining with the dream she had nearly sacrificed for him. Backstage, Gregory Bishop looked on with joy and pride. This was one of the greatest successes of his career, not just because he had discovered extraordinary talent, but because he had helped a remarkable young woman reclaim justice and dignity she so deeply deserved. Meanwhile, in his cold, empty apartment, Preston Montgomery watched it all unfold on TV. He saw Cassie standing radiant, stronger than ever, his heart twisted with shame and bitterness, knowing he had once tried to destroy her, only to fail completely. He understood now that his own downfall was beyond repair, for he had lost the one thing Cassie possessed: unshakable dignity. On the Broadway stage, Cassie bowed, tears of gratitude streaming down her radiant face. The ovation roared on, a wave of love and solidarity crashing over her. She lifted her head, her eyes shimmering, her heart pounding with pride and joy. She knew her life had been reborn from the ashes, stronger and more hopeful than ever. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a sacred reminder etched in her soul. Cassie, never forget. No matter where life corners you, dignity is the most precious thing you have. Never give up. Always rise, even if you must start again from the ashes. Cassie smiled softly, turning her gaze to the audience once more. She knew her story had entered a new chapter, one of light, hope, and strength. Standing on Broadway, facing thousands of uplifted faces, Cassandra Riley had become living proof of one timeless truth. Dignity and self-respect can never be stolen, not by wealth, not by power. And Cassie knew her story would not end here. She was now a symbol of faith, hope, and, above all, the eternal power of human dignity, rising from the ashes to shine brighter than ever before. And what about you? Which moment of Cassie's powerful journey moved you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful and powerful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.